I don't see what the D. You see it?
Wait, he's closed a mating net, Anish. The king, oh wow.
This is just so beautiful from a chess point of view. It's just so incredibly satisfying, this checkmate.
What a moment this is about to be. We're about to see one of the most beautiful finishes to a World Championship game, I think in history, Anish.
So, as you can hear from yourself, I'm not exaggerating in the title of this video. Now, if you've literally clicked just to see this beautiful finish, well, bear with me while I show a few opening moves here so it really builds towards the climax. Now, this is game 6 of an awesome World Championship match. Ding Liren with the white pieces, and he's looking to strike back. He lost yesterday to Jan Nepomniachtchi, who played a beautiful game with white in a Roy Lopez. What did Ding have in store? Well, after these opening moves, he doesn't go for a Queen's Gambit system, he goes for Bishop f4, the London system. We see c5 from Nepo, e3, knight c6, and now knight b to d2 is a slightly more popular move order than going c3 straight away, because now if black goes queen b6, well, white has some more options, you know, the rook's freed up and things like that. So we see takes on d4 now played. Not a forced variation, of course. Another common way to go is with pawn e6 there, and you fianchetto this bishop later on. That's how I love to play myself, actually. But after captures, Jan's got this idea in mind now of bringing the bishop outside the pawn chain, you know, mirroring what white has done. And after c3, we see e6, and this bishop develops to b5. Standard idea, making room to castle the king, and sometimes this bishop actually eliminates that knight and gives access to this knight on the dark square. Now Jan develops his bishop. We see an exchange, the queen recaptures, both players castle, and after rook e1 from Ding, very logical, coming onto the half open file, here Jan, he already starts making some slightly imprecise moves. Now he plays pawn h6, but queen c7 was probably slightly more accurate, because after this move, we now see Ding jump in with his knight, and you can't capture here, or after the pawn recaptures, you're running into this fork. Now it's not actually the end of the line, because queen b6 counterattacks on this piece, but after takes here, takes, you can then shatter the pawn structure, expose the king, and although materials level, this is better for white. So coming back here, this move is impossible. But if you imagine that the queen was on c7, the pawn back on h6, well, suddenly you can play this move. And then this knight would find a home on e4 or g4, black's doing fine. But what we see in the game is the pawn h6 move played, and now there's pressure here. So for example, if you now play queen c7, well, there's takes with the bishop, pawn recaptures, and knight b3, and you're getting a big grip on the dark squares already, as we can see. If knight e4 to cover, well, then this knight can hop back and join the attack on the c5 square, f3 is coming, etc. So instead we see knight e7. That explains this kind of weird retreating move. Doesn't let white chop. And now a4 from Ding, and again Nepo, he plays imprecisely. So he plays pawn a6, kicks this bishop back, but the problem is you're weakening all these dark squares even more, and this knight d7 move just compounds the issue, because Ding now takes, the queen recaptures, and a5, and as mentioned, look at those weakened dark squares. This is positionally really suspect now for black. So queen c7 anticipates this knight coming to c5 later, and eyes this pawn as I'm drawing, and supports e5. And that's really the main source of counterplay now for black, because white is winning on the queen side. And that explains Ding's move of queen f3. He's got this long-term idea in mind of queen g3, challenging the influence of this queen and making e5 difficult. So rook f8 played. Sometimes white's going b4 before knight b3, c5, but okay, no b4 at the moment. We now see Ding go rook to a3. As well as covering here, there's also some ideas in mind of doubling the rooks, then knight b3, c5, because sometimes this knight's coming here to attack the pawn with the queen. Now bishop g6 from Jan, so nudging back that bishop, prophylaxis for the e5 break and the knight moving to c6. Now knight b3, knight c6 played, and queen g3, this is the move mentioned, challenging the queen, could have been played sooner. You know, Giri mentioned stylistically he would have probably played it sooner instead of rook a3, but okay, this is just a matter of choice. And now instead of dropping to d8 here, we see Jan go to e7, but also a good move, again thinking about this pawn to e5 break. And now ding, this is really classy from him, so he doesn't take any rush on the position. You know, he could drop this rook back, just connect these once more, preparing for e5, but instead he goes pawn h4, gives the king some luft. Maybe one day he'll squeeze, and just saying to Jan, well, what are you going to do? What's your move here? So rook e8 played to support e5. Now the knight hops to c5 anyway, and e5 on the board. Now you can't capture that one. The queen would be taking this knight. But what you can do, as Ding played, is rook b3 and put pressure on this pawn now. By the way, b4, actually let me show you this one, b4, also a good move, because even if, even if black achieves e4, this is still a good pawn structure for white, with f3 coming, sometimes b5 as well for the bishop to bounce back out, so it's still good for white. But rook b3 played, and this is very forcing, because it allows this pawn to drop, which Jan takes. But then he takes here. This is Ding's idea. The knight's now left the e5 square. The queen has to go, and now rook a3 jumps away from the knight's attack, hits this one here, and the knight jumps into c4. We see bishop captures, pawn takes back, and now h5 is flicked in before capturing here. You could capture there straight away as well. Both good moves. Now, the bishop jumps to c2, and Jan was critical of this move after the game, and indeed bishop d3 was the better move, because that knight would never really want to capture such a dominant piece on this square. But okay, bishop c2 played, we see knight takes on b7, and now you can take this rook, and most likely here Ding would recapture with the queen, but both options playable, and this endgame is just really bad for black. You know, weak pawns all over the board. This is a better minor piece than this one. f4 can support here. This is not fun at all for black. So we see queen b6 played instead. And now this is a double attack here, but Ding comes up with this excellent move of knight d6 to create new threats of his own. Now this gets the brilliant move question mark piece, because if the queen captures, this is the trick. You take with check, rook takes back, and you pick up the queen. So the knight is immune, can't be captured. Instead we see takes on e5 played, and now taking with the pawn is possible, gives some dynamic play, such as pushing the pawn to e6 later maybe. But instead we see the queen recapturing here, and now queen takes on b2, definitely generates counterplay, but after rook a5, it's white that's in the driving seat, because if you take this pawn, for example, well then there's this knight e8 move, not an easy move to spot, threatening mate, and the idea is that if you block with f6, then there's check, the king goes, okay, sorry, if it comes this way, the knight drops back and you're threatening mate, that's actually unavoidable, and if the king goes this way to h8, well then we can go here, again threatening mate, and you're forcing the win of this exchange. This is better for white, especially because in these kind of endgames, not only are you an exchange up, but the king's always going to be a bit unsafe in this pawn structure. We can see how this pawn move helps from earlier in the game. So we didn't see the queen taking on c3. Instead, king h7 was played, thinking about king safety, and now here Ding goes slightly wrong, but the main computer move of queen e1 isn't so easy to find. Although you cover the pawn, it's kind of heading in the wrong direction. So instead, the rook came to c5, eyeing this one, saying, okay, if you take here, well, I'm going to take this pawn back here, possibly I'll take on f7, although this was one of the better ways for Jan to go. He didn't do this, however. He checked from c1. The king went to h2, and he then played f6 to kick the queen. It dropped back to g3, now covering this pawn and also eyeing this sensitive g7 pawn, trying to get at the king. So what does Jan do? Well, counterplay is the order of the day. He pushes that past a pawn. Now the knight takes on c4, pawn to a4, and knight to e3 played. Great move by Ding, and here Jan, he should have really just carried on running his pawn. Instead he plays bishop b1, but now after rook c7, threatening mate, rook g8, sorry, not queen g8, rook g8 to cover, will hear Ding, he goes on the counter-attack in just a superb manner, with knight to d5. The pawn is attacked, threat take with check because the g pawn is pinned. So king h8 played, and now rook a7 comes behind the pawn. And this is why earlier on, if the bishop's on c2 and the pawn's on a3, well really black's going to be slightly better in that variation. But still, white is ahead and winning. a3 now from Jan, and here we see the knight hop into e7, hit that rook, big threat to take and then deliver a mate using the support of the rook. So we see rook f8 played on the board, and now this is where Ding just comes up with the most superb winning concept. Really deep stuff. Now the top computer move here is rook b7, preparing rook b8 to then bring the queen in, and you're delivering these checkmates which can't be avoided. But what we see in the game is d5, a really deep move, and that's where you see this reaction from David when he realizes what's actually going on. Anish couldn't even see it.
I don't see what the D. You see it?
Wait, he's closed a mating net, Anish. The king, oh wow.
Okay, we're going to see the big idea now. So a2 was played by Jan, of course. Now queen c7 played. There's no time to make a queen, or you're running into check. The king moves, sorry, the bishop takes or king moves, and you get delivered with mate, so that's no good. And so that's why the king came up to h7, no more discovered check, but now knight g6 anyway, rook g8, covered this mating square, and this is where queen to f7 just finished the game on the spot. Jan resigned. Why did he resign? Well, we're going to see the amazing idea now. So if the queen comes to g5, for example, threatening to check and then take here, you know, all that kind of stuff, well, here's the finishing blow, and feel free to pause and find the move. So it's this beautiful queen sack on the board. Unfortunately, we didn't see it played. Queen takes on g8 check. The king recaptures, check, king f7, and rook f8 is mate, but only because the d5 pawn is covering this square. How beautiful is that for a checkmating finish, which would have been played out if Jan hadn't resigned. If you want to see the last game they played, an incredible one, then check out the video on screen, and do subscribe to never miss a future one. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.